Welcome back to the Micromodule series, Understanding Bias in Epidemiological Studies. In this module, we will be focusing on Neyman bias, which is a type of selection bias typically seen in case control studies. The objectives of this module are to explain how Neyman bias occurs, illustrate it with a hypothetical case control study, introduce how to address the bias, and explain the difference between it and the selection bias arising from inappropriate sampling procedure. So first, what is Neyman bias? Neyman bias is a type of selection bias caused by selecting prevalent cases instead of incident cases as the case group in case control studies. A prevalent case is a case who was diagnosed before and is still living with the disease at the time of recruitment. An incident case is a case who was newly diagnosed at the time of recruitment. Using prevalent cases only means that those who had recovered or died from the disease are excluded. If the exposure history differs between the included and the excluded cases, the included case group would be not representative of general cases with this disease in terms of exposure history. Thus, the observed association between exposure and outcome cannot reflect the true association, and this distortion is called Neyman bias, also known as prevalence incidence bias. For example, in a case control study examining the association between caffeine intake and heart attack, the cases are individuals who are heart attack survivors, what we call prevalent cases, while the controls are individuals who never have heart attacks. If patients who already died from heart attacks had higher caffeine intake, using prevalent cases who are still alive as the cases group would underestimate the level of caffeine intake in general cases, make the observed difference in caffeine intake between cases and controls smaller than actual, and thus lead to underestimation of the association between caffeine intake and heart attack. So how to reduce Neyman bias in case control studies? First, recruit incident cases rather than prevalent cases as the case group. By doing so, cases of different severity, whether they will die shortly after being recruited or recover soon, or live the disease for a long time, thus giving a representative sample of general cases. If prospective recruitment of new cases is less feasible because of limited time or resources, making it necessary to recruit cases retrospectively, then try to include cases who had recovered or died before recruitment as well through such data sources as medical records and death registry. However, this is suitable only if the exposure of interest is available from these data sources, such as blood pressure or use of a particular drug during a given time period in the past. If the exposure of interest needs to be reported by cases, such as lifestyle factors, this approach is not suitable since it is impossible to ask deceased people. Now let's compare the selection bias caused by Neyman bias and selection bias caused by inappropriate sampling procedure. Neyman bias is mainly seen in case control studies that select prevalent cases as the case group, while selection bias caused by inappropriate sampling procedure may affect all study designs that involve a sampling process. Neyman bias can be reduced by recruiting incident cases prospectively, rather than using prevalent cases. While to address selection bias caused by inappropriate sampling procedure, the key is to use probability sampling methods. Okay, in this module, we discuss the selection bias caused by Neyman bias and the strategies to address it. In next module, we will introduce the selection bias caused by healthy worker effect. Thank you for listening.